on this computer. So I'm actually, let me grab the, I'm going to try to get here pictures. I got some pictures for you guys. If you're on the group that, how do I get this full screen? Sorry guys, 1 second. If you're on our WhatsApp group, you'll see a bunch of pictures, but right now I'm actually having a hard time trying to, oh, here we go. Open back up. I made the Zoom screen smaller and now, oh, I'm trying to figure out how to open it back up. I don't know how. Hold on. Oh, here we go. Okay, there we go. Okay, so let me get to the phone. Yeah, so if you're on the WhatsApp, you'll notice pictures. I'm actually going to go straight to those pictures now, do a little show and tell before we get started. So let's do that so we know what's going on. Here is our group. And I mean, not all the pictures are straight up, but we'll manage. So the Torah is going to teach us today about kosher and non-kosher. So let's just do the pictures and then we'll do it in order inside the Torah. Of course, this is a very fundamental class. I want to actually mention one more point. If I understand the flow of the Torah correctly without looking at any commentaries, I mean, there's our stuff given, but just on a very basic level, if you follow the order here, at the end of the book of Exodus, we studied about the building of the Mishkan, right? So the order was the Torah was given, the golden calf, the tabernacles built kind of to make up for the golden calf and bring back God's presence to the world, and then we know what you have to do in the tabernacle, in the Mishkan. So the Torah goes into a whole bunch of information about the sacrifices, all the different sacrifices one could give. And we learned all that in the beginning of the third book of Vayikra, of the Torah, of Leviticus. Vayikra and Tzav, and the beginning of Shemini taught us about all the sacrifices, the sin offerings, the peace offerings, the burnt offerings, all the different sacrifices. And then we eventually learned about the actual inauguration of the temple and all the sacrifices that were then brought to inaugurate the temple. So I guess it kind of makes sense. What flows right after that? You're talking about all the animals. Well, what animals are kosher and what animals are not kosher, okay? So now we're going to talk about what animals are kosher and not kosher. And then from that, at the end of today's class, if we get there, or for sure in tomorrow's class, we're going to learn what animals are pure and what animals are impure, okay? So we learned about the building of a tabernacle. We learned about all the sacrifices that are brought to God or so on in the tabernacle. And then we learned about what animals can you eat, can you and I eat on a regular basis. So one of the key elements, which we'll see, and I put a picture of a cow here, is because a cow's hoof is split. As you'll notice in this picture on the bottom of the cows, they have hoofs. Horse also has a hoof. If you've ever been horse riding, if you've ever gone horseback riding, and the horse has no split. We're going to see that a camel, I believe we're going to see, has a partial split. But a cow, a kosher animal, is completely split. And I think if you look at the bone makeup, it's interesting of the way it goes inside the animal, the bones are completely split. And then it comes back and attaches eventually to one bone in the leg. But where the hoof is located, I saw a picture somewhere, the bone is completely split one from another, not like a camel, which is partially split. And that is what makes, the Torah is going to tell us, that's a sign that makes this animal kosher. That's what tells us that this animal is a kosher animal. One of the signs. The other sign we're going to learn is chew its cud. We don't obviously have any pictures of that. But the animal puts it in its digestion system, spits the food back up and spits it out. And that's what makes it kosher. I want to go to the next picture. Let's see what else we got here for you guys. So the Torah is going to tell us 4 animals, very interesting, that have one of the 2 signs. And it's going to tell you that if the animal has one of the 2 signs and doesn't have the other one of the 2 signs, it's still not kosher. And it's going to be a hyrax. That's a picture of whatever a hyrax is. I don't know if you guys know what that is. It is an animal that actually chews its cud, but its feet obviously are not hoofed even. They're not split. And therefore they're not kosher. And the Torah's second example Torah is going to give us is a rabbit, big rabbit. And and it chews its cud, but it spits it, it digests it, splits it up, and then chews it again, and that's what makes it not kosher. Also in today's class, again, we're going to learn a lot, all the basics for kosher. That, what we discussed so far, the larger animals. What about fish? Fish need fins, and they need scales. I believe there's a rule, any fish that has fins has scales. But right, so I believe what we see here. I don't know exactly, the fins on the fish, and that's the way the fish uses the fins to swim. And the scales obviously are what you see, right? Like on a scale of armor of scale. That is what Hashem said. Any of those things that's in the ocean that swim in the waters, that's what makes the fish kosher, as we'll see in today's Chumash. Going through the Torah will then go and will not give us rules for birds. Okay, the Torah will not give us the rules for the birds assigned. So, like animals, we said chooses cut and has split up. Fish, we say um, fish, we say has fins and scales. Birds, the Torah will give us a list, and that's what makes it actually, in a sense, much more complicated. But how do we know what is the names of what they called then in the Torah? Is that the same names as what we're calling it today? But the Torah gives a very specific list and doesn't tell us which ones are kosher. It tells us which ones are not kosher. And if I remember correctly, the reason is because there are many more that are kosher than are not kosher. And therefore, it's telling you the smaller list of the birds that are not kosher. And as Rashi will say, any one of these families are not good. We'll go through the pictures quickly. The Gifrim vulture, the bearded vulture. Again, I don't know if I'm reading all these things correctly. The osprey, that's another kind of a bird. And then here we have the rest of the birds here. We have the common vulture, the crow. I mean, we all know what that is. We have the crow flying around where we live. We have an ostrich. Many of you know what the ostrich is. The cuckoo, the gull, the sparrowhawk, and then the screech owl, the cormorant, the barn owl, the bat, the pelican, the magpie, the stork. I can't see the name for the other ones, but then the other birds. This last one has a big thing on its head, as Rashi will say. We'll see when we get to Rashi. Then, what about the creepy crawling stuff? So the only bug of the creepy crawly stuff are grasshoppers, certain kinds of grasshopper, and we'll see in Rashi that we don't know today really which ones are kosher and which ones are not. Then we go into discuss the impure animals, which are the toad, the mouse, the weasel, the hedgehog, the camelon, the lizard, the mole, and the snails. If you touch their skin, not just are they not kosher, which we already learned, but they are also make you impure. So we're going to learn about that today. So there you go. Instead of going back to the pictures later, let's show the pictures now so we have a good understanding of what's going on. And now we're going to learn it in today's Chumash. Okay. So let's get to it. So we are studying, as I told you, we're holding, even though today's Wednesday, we did this parsha twice, so we're going to study Friday's Chumash today. And then God willing, Tanya will have to catch up when we get to the Tanya another day. But let's study the basics for kosher in today's class. And God spoke to Moses and to Aaron, saying to them. So Rashi just has here, who's God talking to? God spoke to Moses. And God did not speak to Aaron, but he told Moses that he should give over the information to Aaron. And he told Moses, and I guess, or they both told Aaron's two sons, Elazar and Isamar. So it's unique. The first people with the information, like in the reporters in the news, who got the scoop? Out of respect for these people, Moses and his brother Aaron, and Aaron's two children, Elazar and Itamar, they will be the ones to get the information first. Why did they merit it? Because they all did something very special. And there's a very beautiful lesson here. They all didn't speak. Instead of getting angry at Hashem, questioning God for the tremendous pain they're going through of the loss of a child and loss of a brother, Hashem saw the faith they had in him. They didn't question. And out of respect and honor of that, as the next Rashi will tell us, they all will now teach and be messengers to teach the laws of kosher to the Jewish people. So it's called kind of like not the authors, God's the author, but the orators, the teachers of the laws of kosher to the Jewish people was sent through not just Moses, but his brother Aaron, and also together with his two children, Elazar and Itamar. And the reason is because of their tremendous faith they had in Hashem. And even when something painful happened, they believed in God, and because of that, they merited that through them the laws of kosher should come to the Jewish people. Won't just be Moses who will be the one dictating it, but it will be Aaron and also Elazar and Isamar. And what do I want to tell you? Hashem says, "Dabru el bnei Yisrael, speak to the Jewish people." Okay, that I forgot. I missed another. Yeah, Dabru el bnei Yisrael, speak to the Jewish people. Verse 2, Leimar saying. This is what God tells Moses, to tell to Aaron, to tell to Elazar Samar, to teach the Jewish people. tell them, Zoisa Chaya. There's two Rashi. Let me go through the first Rashi, a very interesting Rashi about the laws of kosher. And he says that you should know, not like we think, that kosher is like, oh, I can't eat in a lot of restaurants. It limits me greatly in life because I have to eat kosher and I'm not allowed to eat in these all other things. Rashi tells us that actually it's a badge of honor. It's a beautiful thing. Let's read the second Rashi because of this verse, but just because it's very significant to the message of kosher. So it says, Zoisachaya, this is the life. This is the wild animals. Or you could read it, this is life. This is for those that are living. And Rashi says, because the Jewish people are connected to Hashem, they're connected to the Creator, as we learn in Tanya, and therefore they're befitting to be very, very alive, very connected to the source of energy. They're tremendous. They're connected to the power of life in a very strong way. So therefore, because of that, Hashem made decrees on them about what they could and can't eat. And Rashi gives an example. He says a beautiful example. He says when the doctor goes into the hospital, God forbid, and he sees people are sick, right? And we know we're going through COVID now. He'll see one patient where there's no chance that he'll live. And he'll see another patient which has a chance to cure him. The doctor, about the patient who's doesn't have any chance of living, how much attention will he pay towards him? But the guy, and how much will he diagnose how to treat him? He doesn't know how. There's no chance of the guy living. But the one who's sick and has a chance of living, a strong chance of living, the doctor will sit down and make a very detailed list of what's the good medicine and what's the not good medicine, and he'll try to heal the patient that he has. So he says the same thing is with the Jewish people. The Jewish people essentially are connected to Hashem in a very special way. They're very high neshamas, very high special souls. And they have a special mission in this world. And in order for a Jew to accomplish his mission, to do what he needs to do, the Jew needs to have a special diet to connect with the source of life, to be who he is. And therefore, Rashi tells us, it's not that kosher, as I said, maybe people look at it like it's a handicap for the Jewish people. The opposite. It's because they're so special, they're so unique, and that they need to have a special food because they're allergic to certain allergies, because of their sensitivity, because they're so holy. So for the neshama to express itself in a Jew correctly, it's imperative that the Jew follow the Jewish diet in order for him to be a successful Jew, in order for his soul to shine the way it does. As one I remember about example, share with you guys, I think an example once a while ago. I had a friend who just bought the Porsche SUV, and he was told by the dealership to put in super gas, not to put in regular gas. And he said, it's a bunch of anti-Semites. They want to make more money off me, whatever he said. And he went and his Porsche started shaking. And he realized he made a mistake. Brand new car. I think it was still okay. He just put in the regular gas and he was fine. But to me, the example was a great example in kosher, is that we are very sensitive bodies because of our unique mission that we have as a Jewish people. And therefore, it's imperative that we eat kosher food because we are alive. What does that mean? We're connected to Hashem in a very special, unique way. And in order to live how we're supposed to live the full magnitude of the powerful energy in life that we have connected to us, we need to eat kosher. Okay. So this is the animal asher teichlu that you should eat. Rashi tells us something else, that Moses literally did show and tell. He picked up the animals and he said, this is it. Every animal we're going to hold. This is a cow. This is kosher. This is a camel. It's not kosher. This is a pig. It's not kosher. And then he even did it by all the categories, actually, Rashi tells us, right? The different categories. Moses showed the Jewish people birds. He showed them the bugs, as I said. And he showed them the fish. And he got each one, and he held each one, and he literally did show and tell. And he said, guys, kosher, not kosher, kosher, not kosher. Took them to the butcher shop, took them to ShopRite, and he picked up each one. And he said, guys, this is kosher, this is not kosher. He took them to the farm, and he showed them each animal. Literally, Rashi tells us to show what is kosher and what is not kosher. Okay. And you should eat these animals that are on the earth. Rashi is just giving us something in language. He says the word chaya means a wild animal. Usually we translate, but the truth is the word chaya actually means any animal. And it includes tame animals and wild animals. And that is what we're going to talk about today. Kol mafresas parsa. So what about an animal? What makes an animal kosher? So he tells you, mafresas parsa it has a divided hoof. Has a hoof, mafreses, that's divided. Parts of the hoof is divided. But it's not just divided, because there are camels, like we'll see soon, that are divided, but also shesa, it's split all the way up, that there's a complete split in the hoof of a kosher animal, has its bone structure such and the foot structure such that the hoof is completely split all the way up with these two bones that project out of its foot. And not just that, to make it kosher, it also has to have malas geira chew its cud. Okay, so Rashi explains, it eats its food and then it throws it back up from its insides, from its ingested food, and then it chews it again better to chew it down. I think that's why we see a lot of times, see animals chewing and chewing and chewing. What is it chewing already? You haven't seen it eat. So it's kind of could throw up its food and re-chew it and put it back down again. And the Torah, Hashem tells us in the Torah, this is the signs that make it kosher. Any animal that does this thing, it's a kosher animal. Okay, so those are the signs that make an animal kosher. Another class, maybe if we had a Tuesday night class, we could explain some beautiful reasons why is it that these kind of signs, what's the connection? Why is it that a split hoof animal and chew its cud makes it kosher? But it's not for right now. Now, an interesting Rashi here brings up a twist of a case. We know that you have to slaughter an animal. Then, I mean, once we establish what animals are kosher, we still have to establish that it has to be killed in the proper way for it to be kosher, right? You can't shoot it. You have to slaughter it. The animal must be slaughtered. So he says something interesting. What happens if you slaughtered a cow, and after you slaughtered it like in a kosher way, the cow had a baby, a fetus inside its stomach? Is the fetus kosher because you shechted the mother, or is the fetus not kosher? Maybe it's even walking around. Maybe it was 9 months pregnant and the baby's now walking around. Can you now shoot the animal, or it has to go through the same ritual slaughter? And the Torah is telling you here with this extra word, behema, which was extra in the word, Rashi's telling us, is that you don't have to slaughter it. Since it was inside the mother and it was already slaughtered, kill it in any humane way. And the animal's kosher without having the slaughtering necessary in order to make it kosher. So slaughtering is what makes the animal kosher for us to eat. We're not really discussing that now, but there's an extra word here, and we're learning that if the mother was slaughtered and the baby was inside the mother at the time the mother was slaughtered, the baby doesn't need to be slaughtered. Now, he gets into what about non-kosher animals, okay? That we're going to learn about also impurity and purity starting at the end of today's class, and then in tomorrow's class. And we're going to learn about it that, the topic here is simply, what happens if you slaughtered a non-kosher animal? It's still no good. Even if you do the ritual slaughter that Jewish people do with a kosher animal, if it doesn't have the split hooves, chew its cud and has split hooves, like we're learning now in verse 3, the animal is non-kosher. So it's a prerequisite. If you want to eat meat, the animal must be, only from all the animals that are there, must have the signs of split hoof and chew its cud. Now the Torah goes in and does something interesting. It tells you about 4 animals that are missing one of the 2 signs. And it tells you those are not kosher. Now we do an inference. We learn that if one of the signs don't make it kosher, it's not enough to make it kosher, then for sure, if it's missing both, for sure it's no good, right? The examples, interesting, the Torah gives us are examples of only of an animal that has one and not the other. Let's see what they are. Verse 4, but these you shouldn't eat. Even though they might either chew their cud or they might have a split hoof, still you shouldn't do it. Asagamol, the camel. Why not? What's wrong with the camel? Kimala Gerahu, though, if you look at a camel, you'll see he chews his cud, regurgitates it, he spits it up and chews it again. Uparsa einoi mafris, but its hoof, if you look at the camel's hoof, it's not split. Tami hulachem, it's impure, it's non-kosher. You cannot eat camel meat because although it chews its cud, just like a cow does, but its hooves are not split like a cow, and therefore it's not kosher. What else? Vesashafon, and the hyrax. I showed you a picture of it before. Kimalageru, because the hyrax also chews its cud. It's impure. That's example number 2. Now example number 3, and the here, Vesaraneves. Kimalageru, it also chews its cud. Ufarsa leitafrisu, like tafrisa, leifrisa, and its hoof is not split. It's not kosher for you. Finally, number 4, and here's where the pig gets its bad rap from. That's a chazer. What's wrong with the pig? Oh, he has the opposite problem. Himafris parsahu, his hoof is completely split, but it's completely split. It looks kosher. Gera lo yoger, but he doesn't chew its cud. He's impure. So that, I think, the reason why the pig is really, why do we always say chazer? Why is pig worse than anything else? Because the pig looks kosher. If you look at the pig, he looks like he has a kosher symbol on him. He has a very good split hoof. And he's not kosher because you can't see that the cow doesn't regurgitate its food, doesn't re-chew what it digested, and therefore the pig is not kosher. There's a very interesting Talmud on this, by the way. I don't want to get into it now. Again, this is good for a Tuesday night class. But we see, very interesting, that they said that the 4 examples Torah gave are the only 4. In other words, there's no other animal that has one and not the other. It's just a fascinating idea. It's a conversation for another time, but the Torah gives us 4 examples. And then the Torah ends saying, you shouldn't eat their meat. These animals that only have one and not the other, do not eat their meat. Now, Rashi tells us, what do we learn from the fact that you can't eat their meat? If there's a part of the animal that's not really edible and for some reason you're eating it, it's kosher, it's okay. If you want to eat its hoof, if you want to eat, different parts of the animal that are hard and so on, and you eat them, it's not a violation of this Torah law. You're not allowed to eat it. And not just should you not eat their bodies, their meat, their carcasses, which means loisigo, you shouldn't touch them. So these 4 animals, if they die and there is roadkill or whatever, they were shot, or anyway they died, I guess, they were shot, or even if they were shachted, it doesn't matter. I guess the meat in the non-kosher meat department in the store, if you touch them, not just you're not allowed to eat it, but if you touch them, you're also going to become impure from these animals. Now, a kosher animal, you could also become impure. But that's only if it died, not through shchita. So the deer, we know we have a lot of roadkill of deer where we are, which is a kosher animal. Its hoof is completely split, and it chews its cud. Those animals can make you impure. But if they're slaughtered, obviously, if you're touching kosher meat in the kosher meat department, you had steak over Pesach and so on, they're a kosher animal, they were shechted, and therefore they don't make you impure. Okay, so Rashi says here, I know we only brought you examples of non-kosher animals that had one and didn't have the other, but he's saying, obviously, if an animal that has one sign and doesn't have the other sign is not kosher, you could safely assume that if an animal is missing both, for sure the animal's not kosher. Okay, don't eat their meat, but you could eat their bones or the the hoof of the animal, different parts of the animal that are not eaten. You're not in violation. It's okay to eat those parts of the animal because it's not part of the meat. Okay, and don't touch their carcasses if you don't want to get impure. Don't touch their carcasses if you don't want to be impure. So there's no prohibition for you to be impure. It's really on Kohanim is the main prohibition. A Kohen is not allowed to become impure, but a regular Jew, if he wants to go to the temple, like you'd go 3 times a year to Jerusalem instead of going to Florida like they do today. They used to go to the temple 3 times a year, and you have to be pure, and you would not be allowed to touch these kind of dead animals. What about the fish? That's it, and that's the Torah section for animals. What about fish? And this you should eat mekol asher b'mayim, anything that's in the water. Kol asher loy snapir v'kaskeses, anything that has a snapir or a kaskeses. What is that? Those are fins and scales, as I showed you in the picture. What makes a kosher fish kosher? If it has fins and scales. But mayim, as long as he's telling you what happens if you go fishing, and there are certain fish, I think that the scales fall off as soon as you pull them out of the water. He's telling you it's still kosher as long as it's b'mayim. As long as when it's in the water, at a certain point it has scales, fins and scales, then you know it's kosher, even though you take the fish out and then it doesn't have the scales anymore. So it doesn't have to be on it. It had to have had it. It could be had some surgery or something, whatever, and you don't see it. But as long as it's a kind of species and the animal has it, it's kosher. Those that are in the water, the rivers, all the fish that have fins and scales are kosher, and you could eat tuna fish, and I think bluefish, right? And salmon, all these fish have fins and scales, and all these fish are kosher. Whoever doesn't have a fins and scales, like sharks, right? And we'll learn soon all seafood, lobster and all this other stuff. But chalim, called sheretz hamayim, all the things in the creepy stuff in the water. We'll see soon. It's going to actually mention, I think, snails. Makal nefesh chaya shabamayim, all living things in the water, the whole seafood industry that are not fish that have fins and scales. Sheketz heim lachem. They are disgusting to you, to a Jew. They are abominable. Like they say, sometimes reminds me, they say they're bottom feeders. They're, ooh, how could you eat it? They're bottom feeders anyway. But it's not because they're dirty, just Torah considers them that as we said at the beginning of the class, that a Jew has a special mission. He's connected to Hashem in a very special, holy way. And in order to keep that holiness, he cannot eat all the seafood kind of stuff. A Jew could only eat fish that have fins and scales on them, like I mentioned, tuna and salmon and bluefish and all the good stuff like that, and not sharks or lobster or those stuff. Sheketz yelachem. They should be abominable to you. All these creepy crawly things. They should be abominable to the Jew. We should be this kind of, I guess the word is, disgusted by them. We should not want them. And Rashi says, even if there's a mixture of stuff, so someone putting non-kosher fish, either with kosher fish or with other mixtures, you're still not allowed to eat it. Sushi, if it's non-kosher fish inside the sushi, with the rice, it's still not good. You can't eat the sushi. You can't eat the mixture of soups with non-kosher stuff in it. You're not allowed to eat it. You want to eat the scales or the bones? Fine, you can eat that because that's not normal food. Rashi's telling you, sorry, you can't eat the meat. Again, it keeps on saying their meat you're not allowed to eat, but their scales, which are not really food, or their bones, which are not really food, that is not a prohibition in the Torah. And there's also another kind of a creature that, I don't know exactly how this works, some kind of maggot or something that you separated from water. I don't know, it's like created by the water, in the water. It's not a prohibition as long as it's still part of the water. But once you take it out, they call them mutrons in French, midges or something. I'm not sure what it is, but that's the Torah is concluding in these prohibitions, these things that come from the water, and they come from the water and they don't have fins and scales, they're not fish. Once you pull them out of the water, they're prohibited for you to eat them. Again, anything that does not have fins and scales, it's abominable for a Jew to eat. And he says, Rashi here says that if you took them out of the water and they lost their fins and scales as you took them out, they're fine, as long as they had fins and scales inside the water. So those are, my friends, our list of all the signs of kosher and non-kosher animals and fish. What about birds? The Torah is now going to list to us, I believe it's 20 birds that we're not allowed to eat. And instead of giving us a sign like it did for the other two, it's going to go through a list and just tell us what they are. So here we go. And these are disgusting to you, abominable to you from the birds. And you should not eat them. And Rashi tells us, not just are you have to eat kosher chicken and kosher fowl, you're not allowed to give your children to eat non-kosher either. Cannot. A parent is responsible, it's part of parenting, the Torah is telling us, to make sure that their children also are only eating the kosher species and not the non-kosher stuff, even if they're little kids. So what are they? And another thing Rashi says, he says, look, we are going by species. It's going to use the word liminehu, and that tells us that there could be birds that look different from each other, but it's the same species, or they could have very different names, but it's the same species. As long as it's the same species, it has the same rules and halacha of these 20 different species that we're going to mention here, and they would be prohibited. Let's see what the Torah says. Okay. You shouldn't eat these birds that we're going to tell you. Sheketz heim, they are abominable. And here they are, es hanesher, which is the eagle, ves haperes vehas haoznia, the griffin vulture, the kite, and the osprey. Those birds are not allowed to be eaten. Those are the first three. Let's continue going. Ves hadoya, ves ha'aya lemina. And then the next two, the kestrel and the vulture, which is the next two. We now are up to five. It's called orev lemina. Number six, any kind of a orev. Orev is a raven, right? We have them, those black birds flying around that we see them. The ravens, they're also prohibited. Ves bas hayano, and the ostrich. Ves hatachmas, ves hashacha, ves haneitz liminehu. The jay, the sparrowhawk, and the goshawk, after its species, all these are prohibited for a Jew to eat. Those are 10 so far. Verse 17. Ves hakois, ves hashalach, ves hayanshuf. Okay, this is now, what are you holding? 11 and 12 and 13, I think. What are these three? The owl. Rashi tells us, I'm sorry, the shalach, that's the next one, that's the gull. That is a kind of bird, Rashi says, that dives into the ocean and pulls out birds from the ocean. It goes fishing, pulls out birds from the ocean. That's the shalach. The next word is ves hayanshuf. Yanshuf are the birds that screech. They're the owls that screech at night. Rashi says they have a face like a person. You ever saw an owl face? It looks like it's a flat, almost like a person face, Rashi tells us. And it has a cheekbone, has cheekbones like a human being. And those are also prohibited. Okay, so far we're holding, I think we had 13. Now we're going to learn 14, 15, and 16. Vesatin shames, vesakoos, vesarochem. The bat, Rashi tells us it looks like a flying mouse. The same word tinshames is used by bugs. That's referring to a blind bug that he calls it something, a talpi or something, some kind of a bug. But anyway, here it's referring to the bat. It's a flying mouse. Vesakoos, vesarochem. And the verse said the starling and the magpie. Those are also prohibited. Those are not allowed to be eaten. Verse 19. Vesachasida. Okay, we're doing the last three now, 17, 18, or last four, 17, 18, 19, and 20. What's the chasida? Chasida is a stork. Why is it called chasida? It sounds like chasidim, because it's kind. It does kindness. Who does it do kindness with? With its partners, with its friends. The stork will split its food and share it with its friends and companions. And then we have the ha'anafa. That's the heron. Rashi says it's a hot-tempered bird. It's an angry bird. Then we have the mina to its kinds, the satuchfis. Then we have the hupi and the atalef, which is another kind of a bat. It's a wild rooster that has a large thing on his head. In the pictures I showed you before, he had this big thing sticking out of its head. And that is what, if I'm saying the English word right, the hupi, is that unique bird. Those are all 20 different birds that are prohibited for us to eat. And that is the end of the every other bird is kosher. We're allowed to eat besides these lists of bats and what did we say? Eagles and vultures, different kinds of birds. Those are all prohibited, and they're required for a Jew to be a good Jew and to serve Hashem in the right way he should. You're not allowed to eat from those different birds. Verse 20. Kol sheret ha'oif. Any kind of a flying insect. So insect that crawls on the ground, but it flies. For example, Rashi says hornets, the flies, mosquitoes, and different locusts. That crawl on 4 feet. Sheketz hulachem. It's prohibited to you. It's disgusting. It's abominable. A Jew, it shouldn't be in his diet. He's not allowed to eat the stuff. So, what kind of insect can you eat? This might come as news to some of you. There are certain kind of locusts or grasshoppers that if it fills a requirement, you can eat them. But Rashi writes that we do not know today what they are. Let's see this verse. These are the ones you're allowed to eat. From any kind of the flying insects, there's a certain kind of insect that's allowed. It has to walk on 4 feet. Of the 4 feet ones, I'm sorry, you're allowed to eat it. Asher loy kro'ayim mimal raglov. he has to have extensions above his regular legs. I think these are the hopping, like grasshoppers are hop. Besides its regular legs, it has these 2 feet that help it hop. Lenater behen ala aretz, from which they hop on the ground. So if it has the 4 feet, and it has these 2 special feet that are jumping, and Rashi says, where are these 2 feet on its body? It's next to its neck. And when it wants to jump, it uses these 2 feet, boom, and it jumps. And Rashi says that the truth is there are many of these kind of grasshoppers between us. I guess even where we live, there's many of these grasshoppers. Now, the Torah is going to make the list smaller, that even among these 4-legged grasshoppers with 2 jumping feet, they have to be under a certain category. Let's see the next verse 22, and then we'll come back to this Rashi. As these of the grasshoppers with 4 feet and 2 jumping feet that come up from its head part, you eat as a arba. It has to either be called arba, limina vesa sloim limineu, vesa chargel limineu, vesa chogel limineu. It has to be either part of the red locust, the yellow locust, the spotted gray locust, or the white locust. Then it is kosher. Rashi says, so why don't we eat them today? We don't know. First of all, it has to have 4 signs to be kosher, Rashi says. It has to find all 4 signs. What are the 4 signs? A, it has to have 4 feet. B, also, it has to have, not mentioned here, it has to have 4 wings, part of their body. On top of that, it's got to have these 2 legs, which we mentioned, that are jumping. And also, its wings have to cover most of its body. Even once you figure that all out, it also, on top of that, needs to have a long head. There's like different size heads, grasshoppers, and have no tail. Some do, some don't. And its name has to be Chagov. And that's way too complicated. And Rashi says, although the Torah is telling us that there is a kosher kind of species, I don't know if this is like a delicacy or not, it's still, we don't know today which is the one that falls under the right family group. And we don't know which one has exactly the right head and the right tail and so on. And therefore, for all practice or practical purposes, although verse 21 and verse 22 are telling us that there are non-kosher and kosher kind of crawling stuff, which would be a grasshopper, we can't really eat it today because we don't know if it's kosher or not. Verse 23. Any bird, any flying insect that has otherwise any 4-legged flying insect is not kosher. However, if it's an insect that has 5 legs, it is kosher. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but I guess if you have 5-legged grasshopper, it might be kosher. Anyway, I'm not sure more details about that. Verse 24. And not just are you not allowed to eat these stuff, you also will become tamei. A kohen is not allowed to become tamei. And a regular Jew wants to go into the temple and eat holy stuff is not allowed to become impure. These animals, if you touch their dead carcasses, you touch them, these bugs and stuff, I guess, the carcasses of these bugs, their dead bodies, yitma, you will become impure. It will be a very short impure period. It'll only be on the erev until night. You will go to the mikveh and you will be tamei until the night if you touch these the carcasses of these things. Not just if you touch it, verse 25, even if you carry it. Even if you carry it, you're not even, so touching it is like you're sticking your hand out to touch it. But what happens if it's on your shoulder or something? Any of these bugs that you carry, these things of their carcasses, not just are you tamei, your clothes are tamei, and now you and your clothes got to go to the mikveh. You know what, I guess if you wanted to go to the temple, you basically would have to go to the mikveh. You don't know if you've touched any of these things. Now you're in tamei, you and your clothes would need to go to the mikveh in case it became impure. Verse 26, l'chala behema, by the way, l'chala behema asher hi mafreses parsa v'sheisas eni sheisa v'geir eni mala. Any animal also that's non-kosher because it doesn't have fully split hooves, it doesn't chew its cud, they are impure, and if you touch them too, you also will become impure. And Rashi here gives us the examples of animals that don't have a completely split hoof, only partially. And he says a camel that is split on top but not on bottom. Its lower part of its hoof is not split. And therefore, their carcasses of these non-kosher animals will make you impure. What about dogs, cats, and bears? maybe lions too, I guess, that don't have hoofs, that have paws, are four-legged animals. They will also make you impure if you touch their carcasses. We already learned that they're not kosher because they obviously don't have split hooves, but they also will make you impure if they're dead. Again, whoever will touch their carcasses will be impure till night. And again, if you carry them, you will have to not just become impure yourself, your clothes will become impure. You'll be impure until it's nightfall, just through that day. Go to the mikveh during the day, and you'll have to wait till it's dark outside, and then by then you could become pure. What about bugs? He's going to give you a list of 8 bugs now that their carcasses are impure. The weasel, the mouse, the achbar, the hatzav, limine, when the toad after its species. We're not talking about that they're not kosher. We already learned that they're not kosher. They don't have split hooves to chew their cud. But if you touch them, you're not allowed to go into the Beis Hamikdash. You first need to go to the mikvah, and then you can then you're pure. And after you touch these things, and he finishes a list of 8: the hedgehog, the chamelin, the lizard, the snail. Rashi says it grows with its shell, and the mole. It's verse 31. These are unclean for you, and all the bugs. And if you touch their carcasses, you will be impure until these crawling stuff be crawling until evening. And any of these animals, after they're dead, they fall on you. Even if they don't fall on you, they fall on a wooden vessel, or on a cloth, or onto a leather kind of a cloth, a sack or a bag, a sackcloth, any vessel that you use. If they fell on it, they also become impure. And they will be impure until night. You bring them into the mikvah, and then they will be tamei until the evening. And that, my friends, is the end of the big class. All the details about which animals are kosher, which fish are kosher, which bugs are kosher, and about them also making you impure. Any questions or comments on today's lesson? Yes, Ira.
So what happens if you eat something that's unkosher? You go to the mikveh or you're done?
I believe you have to go to the mikveh. You become impure. You're asking a question. The Talmud asks your question, actually. What happens if you didn't touch it and you just swallowed it? Is that considered touching it? Is that your question?
Yeah.
Right. When you lift up the non-kosher item to eat it, you'll become impure by just lifting it up, by touching it. So you already become impure. But you're asking a case that if somebody else fed you, you never touched it, and you just swallowed it, do you become impure? Oh, the Rambam talks about this. The Gemara talks about this. I think.
What if you're eating a meal and you didn't know there was something in the meal that was impure, like
You're tummy. You're impure. I mean, you touched it. What I'm saying, like you would have normally touched it. You don't know that there's something in there, but you touched it.
Right. After the fact, you found out.
So what's the question? Impure doesn't go by most cases. I mean, you're. I believe you're impure. It's not about knowing or not knowing. If you touch it, you're impure until night. You go to the mikvah, and then by nightfall, you're pure.
Okay.
I'm saying like.
So I guess that's why converts go to a mikvah.
But by the way, many Jews would become impure. I think the opposite. I think that in the days you knew you were going to the Beis Hamikdash, you would make sure to become pure. Or you're right. No, certain people would live their whole life. They'd want to live pure. They would have to be very careful. Correct. But they would probably need to go to the mikvah. I'm saying like it's very hard to avoid some of these things. It's not so easy to avoid all of these different possibilities. Correct. It's all over the place. If you touch, these different kinds of bugs that are dead, you become impure. Even if you're carrying them or just touching them, you already become impure. And therefore, it's a short impurity. It's only for that day. By night, you're already pure again, but you got to go to the mikvah. Yeah, that's correct. Any other questions or comments on today's class of kosher? Yes, Andrea.
Hi, Rabbi. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good, Baruch Hashem. So how about like all the byproducts of animals that we use, like pearls come from an oyster, or sometimes people wear rabbit hair coats, things like that. Are those not allowed also?
Well, that's a good question. So are those, will those make you impure? Well, maybe the question, I guess, is once it's turned into a coat, is it still considered the carcass of the animal? Does it
Right,
need to, the question also is, does it need to have meat inside it or not? You know, like
right,
we said, it's not non-kosher to eat it's to eat the skin, some certain, let's say, hard skins that are not really food. It might not be a problem to eating it. The
right.
question is, if it has no meat attached to it and it's completely dried out, is it still impure? I don't know. Let me verify that. I have some thoughts on
Okay.
that, but I don't want to say
Wouldn't that
anything. That's a good
be
question.
wouldn't that be like the hats that the Hasidic wear are made from non-kosher animals? No.
Yeah.
Rabbi,
That's
can't you
right.
just put the pearls in the mikvah and make them kosher?
Doesn't work like that. You know, it's not going to work. They took one time. They went like on the street and they asked people, what do they think kosher is? And there was such funny answers. You know, you just sprinkle water on it and it makes it kosher. But that's clearly not from today's Chumash. This is a very strict rule about what animals are kosher and what animals are not kosher. That's a good question. All right, let me see. Maybe tomorrow I'll pick up some stuff on this. It's a great
Okay,
question.
thank you.
Yeah, but this is the basic. This is the Chumash, the original idea of where kosher comes from. Anyway, awesome. All right, cool. Very good. Any questions or comments? If not, we'll say goodbye.
No, I got a question, Rabbi.
Yes, say out.
On one of the Rashis that we read today, it gives the impression that bones and ligaments are kosher even on a non-kosher animal.
Correct, because the Torah says mipsarim, from the meat you should
Right.
eat.
Is that true?
And it's I guess, yeah, it's not food. You know
So
what you might,
if that's the case, then gelatin should be kosher.
right? No, first of all, what's gelatin made of? The bones, but
Yes.
right. I don't know. You know what? It's a good question. It's a good question. Maybe
All
I'll
right.
look into it. I'll look into this stuff. You're asking a lot of good questions. We don't eat gelatin. We try to take medicine that's not. Maybe this is old biblical, Eyal. It could be rabbinically, there's still a prohibition on it. You know what I mean? Like the rabbi said, don't eat it at all.
Right.
Again, we're discussing at a biblical perspective. I am not sure why, but yeah, you're right. We don't eat it. Gelatin, if it comes from the bones, maybe it's the marrow of the bone. I don't know. You know what? I don't really know much about it. But let me look into it, and we'll be in touch tomorrow. Hopefully, I'll share with you some stuff tomorrow.
All right. One last thing.
Yes.
They just found out lately that giraffes are actually kosher.
Yeah, 100%. Giraffes are kosher. Giraffes chew their cud and have split hooves. I remember the rumor going around was that they don't know where on the giraffe to slaughter it, but then I heard that it's exactly the opposite is true, because I actually learned the laws of shchita, of ritual slaughter, and you make less of a mistake. Like when you learn about the bird, there's a very small window where you can slaughter it. The giraffe, there's so much place to slaughter it. It should be the opposite problem. The real reason is because in halacha today, we follow only Kabbalah, which means we don't just go by we actually don't just look up the animal and say, okay, does it have chew, it's cut, and has split hooves, and then it's kosher, like the Torah says. We follow tradition. Whatever was eaten is what we continue to eat. I think that's why even maybe some people don't eat turkey or something like that, or certain turkeys, because the question is, even though the Torah doesn't list it as the birds that are non-kosher, they want to have like tradition passed down one from the next. So that's why one of the reasons why we don't eat giraffe. And I think also in a practical sense, the meat is very hard and it's not good. But yes, in other words, back to your first point, without everything I just added, a giraffe is kosher. Giraffe is split hooves and chews its cuds too. And that is correct. Very good.
I heard that the other rule for a kosher animal is also that their milk must curd and can turn into a cheese, where a non-kosher animal will not do it.
So that might be later on things. That might be signs that rabbis came out to help them figure out. But again, the Torah, you saw what the Torah says. The Torah says chew its cut and half split hooves is is the original commandment of the Torah. Maybe there's other things which there is things that make cheese. There's a problem with they would use non-kosher udders or some kind of cheese in order to make milk into cottage cheese. You know, that's part of the reason why we're worried that kosher milk needs to have a cheeses and stuff need to have a kosher symbol, because they shouldn't mix any other kind of, maybe like there's another kind of milk that could make it stronger and last longer or make it into cheese faster or so on. Yeah, that's why it has some kosher supervision on it. But and again, that might be something later on that they figured out, but not part of the original Torah of what makes an animal kosher or non-kosher, I believe. All right. Eyal, great point. Thank you, Eyal, Ira, and Andrea for great comments. Hopefully we'll have more information for you. And wish you all an amazing day. And we'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place, as we continue to study the Tanya and the Chumash. All the best, everyone. Have a good day.